Hi, so that's us live. Hi, Sarah.
Hello, how you doing?
Good, thanks. Thanks for joining us. Still virtually for now, but we're here.
Yep.
Yeah, and thanks everyone for joining us. And so we've got Sarah Lane here from Octopus Deploy, and I'll let her introduce herself in a second. But as usual, let us know in the chat where you're joining us from, either we're in Scotland or beyond. And yeah, tag us hashtag Scottish Developers on any of the socials to say hello or give us some feedback. And as always, if you're interested in taking part in the meetups, joining us, giving a talk, anything like that, do just get in touch. But Sarah, hi, and thanks for joining us. And would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Sarah Lean. I'm a senior solutions architect over at Octopus Deploy. I'm a recent Microsoft MVP as well. And yeah, I'm a techie from Scotland as well. So hopefully everybody will be able to understand my accent, given it's a Scottish user group. I'm always wary of the Scottish accent internationally. I'm
I
rubbish at
love that.
doing
I
an
love
interview,
giving
Carol.
talks and no, I love giving talks in Scotland because I don't need to change my accent. I can be as Glaswegian as I want to. So, yay. But bear in mind it is on YouTube, so anyone
I
can
know.
watch it. So I am very conscious of how fast that I speak sometimes. But no, yes. So I'll share your screen now, and I'll let you get started. So you're going to chat to us about when superpowers combine Octopus Deploy in Azure. So I'm personally really excited. I was telling you I use this stack at work. So if nothing else, I'm very excited about this talk. Over
Good
to you,
stuff.
Sarah.
Thank you. So yeah, as Carol said, I'm going to be talking about Azure and Octopus Deploy. I used to work at Microsoft, and Azure was my passion and the thing that I talked about when I was there. So I'm trying to combine these two great products and my knowledge as well. So 6 months ago, I joined Octopus Deploy, and I'm slowly building up my knowledge. So hence this talk is a combination of my existing skills and my new skills. So hopefully you're going to enjoy it this evening. I'm happy to take any questions. I'll probably leave them to the end, so definitely leave them in the chat and we'll get to them. But yeah, feel free to ask me any questions. I usually, when I'm speaking at like international groups, always take a little bit of Scotland with me, and I'm conscious that we're probably in Scotland for the majority of the people, but I love this picture of a Highland cow or a Highland cow, and I always introduce this picture because Highland cows, if you're from Scotland, you'll know, are very adaptable animals. They stay outside all year round and their coats can deal with the harsh winters that we have and the nice summers that we have as well. So they're a very adaptable animal. And I think they are great analogies for us in the animal kingdom. So, as IT pros or IT developers or anybody that works in IT, we are very adaptable because we have to learn all about new technologies. We have to deal with constant user needs changing, business needs changing. There's always something that we're having to adapt to. So, I think it's pretty cool that the Highland cow and IT people are pretty similar, maybe. I don't know. I always like to say to bring a bit of Scotland with me on my presentations, and I think this is a great story to tell and introduce people to a bit of Scottish culture and trying to weave in a bit of IT as well. So hopefully you've enjoyed that. But let's talk about the tech. And tonight I'm going to talk to you about the tech around a story of Octo Pet Shop. Now, Octo Pet Shop are a pet shop that we have made at Octopus, and they are having some issues that we're going to try and solve with technology tonight. So they have an online store, but it's not very stable. They have some issues with it. It's constantly going down. There's issues when they try to change things because they only have a production environment. They change in the production, and when things go wrong, it isn't very stable and it's not a great environment for the customers trying to use this online shop. Also, they still have legacy hardware that sits underneath a desk inside their pet shop, and they want to remove that because A, it's very old, and B, it does cause some issues because the classic one, people kick it while it's under a desk and it goes offline, and again, it's not a great customer experience. So we're going to move them to the cloud, try and modernize it all, and look at how we can make it better using a few different products out there. So the plan tonight is to talk about Azure. And Azure is going to be the platform where their infrastructure will live and be for the Octo Pet Shop. So we'll be replacing that legacy hardware server and putting it into Azure instead. We'll also introduce Azure DevOps as the source control, as the part that stores all of the code for their online store, looking at doing the source control part for it. And we'll also be using Azure DevOps for actually tracking some of the items that we want to do, like the backlogs and tasks that may need to be changed as well. And last but by no means least, we're also going to introduce Octopus Deploy, which will help us deploy that software and help us deploy our infrastructure as well out into Azure, and just make that process a lot better, not only for the people at Octopus Pet Shop, but the end users and the IT team as well behind all of this. So what is Azure? Now, I'm sure a lot of you know what Azure is, but in case anybody isn't, and I do love sharing this slide because I think it's very cool, even though it is a little bit old. Azure is a cloud service that can help you provide a lot of services. If we have a look at the slide on screen right now, you've got things like platform as a service, you've got compute, you've got analytics, you've got data services, you've got security, you've got identity, you've got management tools. There are a whole host of services inside Azure that you can leverage. Now, you can leverage it one bit at a time, so adopt a service as you grow and as you are moving along your journey of the cloud computing. Or you can go all in and use everything in there. I think at last count, there was over 1,000 different services across Azure. So there should be something there that you can use depending on your needs. So yeah, it's probably out of date, as I said, this slide, because there's so many more other products that have been released, but I still think it's quite good to represent the different elements that the cloud platform of Azure can actually offer you. Now, the other component that we're going to be introducing and demoing tonight as well is Azure DevOps. Now, again, I'm sure a few of you will know about Azure DevOps, but for anybody that doesn't, Azure DevOps is another suite from Microsoft, and it allows you to store your source code, so you can use that as your source control, as that repository for all of your code. You can also use it to help collaborate and plan out the tasks that you have for either today or the long-term future using Azure boards. We have pipelines as well that can do CI/CD, so continuous integration or continuous delivery. And that's that DevOps kind of culture and methodology that you may have heard about. There are other things around test plans and artifacts and storing different things inside of that. We're going to concentrate on the top half of Azure DevOps here on the slide. So Azure boards, pipelines, and the repo as well for our source code. Now, we could use Azure DevOps exclusively itself and just use that for our CI/CD pipeline. But what we're actually going to do is introduce Octopus, because Octopus has some great features and functionality that can actually help enhance not only Azure, but our Azure DevOps environment as well. And we have native integration with Azure DevOps and Octopus as well. So it's a great combination to introduce. Now, Octopus Deploy might be something that you aren't aware of. I know Carol uses it, and she's probably more familiar with it than me at the moment, given that I'm still new to the product. But ultimately, what Azure Octopus Deploy allows you to do is automate the deployment of your software and make that process a lot simpler. So we often see a lot of deployments that are quite complex, and the complexity comes into the fact that you may have different scenarios when you're in your test environment, maybe you have the different scenarios when you're in production, or maybe you're starting to do things like blue-green deployments and you're taking some servers out of play when you're doing an upgrade, shuffling them around, making some live, taking some out. All of those kind of complexities and the logic that has to happen when you're upgrading your software or doing some maintenance tasks to your environment can get quite complex. But with Octopus Deploy, we can simplify that. And I think as a team behind the back end of Octopus Deploy, they're all developers. The people who have developed Octopus Deploy are developers, and they know the pain points that they've had to suffer over the years. And hopefully they're building in all of the pain points and trying to solve them with Octopus Deploy. Now with Octopus, you can run it anywhere. So we have a couple of options in terms of bringing it into your environment. You can use our cloud platform. So we host Octopus Deploy, and ultimately that's a PaaS or a SaaS service that we look after. We look after the back end and all the maintenance, and all you need to take care of is what happens inside Octopus Deploy itself. So if there's any patching of the back-end infrastructure, we at Octopus would look after that for you. And again, we can help you with different things around there as well. Or you could take the traditional route and you can take the software and, it's an MSI or an exe file nowadays. It's not a CD you would be given, but you could take that and deploy that onto a server, whether that's a physical server in your own data center or whether that's potentially a virtual machine sitting in the cloud of your choice as well. So you can decide on which option you want to do. In terms of the environments that we can interact with at Octopus, we can interact with any, whether it's a Windows server, whether it's a Linux server, whether it's your native cloud native services, your Kubernetes, your PaaS services, ECS, all different things we can take care of. And again, we can interact with all of those cloud providers that you may be using, whether it's Azure, AWS, Google. I was actually talking about AWS in an implementation with Octopus Deploy earlier today as well. So there's lots of scope there depending on what you need. We also have integration with a lot of popular CI servers, so your continuous integration servers as well. So we can plug into Jenkins and GitHub Actions, JetBrains, Azure DevOps, as we'll see tonight, and much, much more as well. So you don't have to do away with a tool or remove a tool if you already have it. We have a lot of customers that are using the native CI tooling inside of a lot of those products, and also bolting on Octopus Deploy to help it and enhance what they're doing as well. So as I said, we try to make it so that your deployment process is a lot simpler. You define it once, and using variables and scoping steps, you can then change how that behaves depending on your environment. So again, like I said, you could have steps that are scoped only for your test environment and then have ones for your production environment. Actually, we'll be showing you some of that later on in the demo as well. So we'll see how you can build one process and just have steps that are scoped to different things so that it's simple for you and you don't have to remember that, oh, that process has to run and test. This is the process for production. You'll just have one process, you'll hit run, and then Octopus will take care of all of that logic that you've built in behind the scenes as well. One of the things that I've really enjoyed using actually is runbooks, and that's a feature inside Octopus as well, and it's usually aimed towards your operations team. So runbooks can be used for maintenance tasks, so maybe you have a server that needs a service stopped and started every now and again because it's just a troublesome server. You can have a runbook that will have that automation into it, so you don't have to get up at 2 in the morning when your pager or your email is bleeping away telling you that something's went wrong. We can have that runbook running ahead and doing that for you. Or we can do complex things like your infrastructure as code deployments. Again, I'll be showing you a bit of that in the demo as well. We've even had customers who are using it to collect their DORA metrics. So there's lots of different uses for the runbooks inside Octopus Deploy. So we're not just a tool for developers, we're a tool for everybody in the IT department as well. Now, our design team will probably not be happy that I have done my own artwork, but I was having a bit of fun with my Surface Book and my Surface Pen and drew out the CI/CD pipeline that I'm actually going to try and show you where we're going to go and where actually Octopus fits inside that journey. So you usually start off with your code and you'll be working it on your workstation or your desktop or whatever it may be, and then you'll commit that code into source control. In our instance here this evening, it'll be a GitHub, it'll be an Azure DevOps repo, and we'll have that source code stored in there. We then have Azure DevOps monitoring that source control and having a look at that code. And if something happens or a changes happen, then our CI pipeline will trigger and then it will run and build off what it needs to do in terms of that CI pipeline. Any of the build artifacts will then get pushed to Octopus, and then Octopus will then take those build artifacts and push them out to our test and a production environment. So that's kind of the journey that we're going to go on for Octo Pet Shop and have all of their code and infrastructure building through that entire process, hopefully in tonight's demo. So talking of demo, let's switch over and start to talk about what that all looks like in the back end and how it all pieces together. So first, I want to head over to Visual Studio Code. And what I've got here is a folder with all of the code for the Octo Pet Shop. I've got the application, which is built up of a few portions. So we've got our database. We've then got the product service API. We've also got the shopping cart API and the web front end for interacting with our customers. And those are the 4 key elements that we'll be deploying. We'll be using web apps within Azure to deploy them. So we're using PaaS services. So we'll have a PaaS service for each of those components, our web, our shopping cart, our product service, and then we'll have a SQL Server database, again, a PaaS service on Azure, and we'll be deploying that database there. Now, all of this code is .NET 6. I'm not a developer, so I'm not going to walk you through the code necessarily, but my colleagues have done a great job in upgrading this recently to .NET 6 and keeping it up to date for us. Also inside my folder is my Azure DevOps pipeline, a good old YAML file, because we all love YAML and trying to figure out the indentation for it. So what we have in this pipeline is working through building that .NET application. So anything that happens, any changes that happen to my main repository, the Git repository inside Azure DevOps, will then trigger this pipeline. What we'll use a Windows 2022 server that has a few bits of PCs and tools installed on us, and then we'll start to build out that .NET application. So we'll be restoring the application, we'll be building it, we'll be doing some basic tests on the application, as any good CI/CD pipeline does. We'll then start to build it in various different .NET steps and working through it. What eventually we will be doing with that application, though, is packaging it up as a zip file. So each of the components, our web front end, our product service, our shopping cart, and our databases will all be packed up into individual zip files that will then get pushed into Octopus Deploy and will then be available for us to deploy out to our infrastructure as well. Now, that pipeline is quite involved, and you're probably thinking, Sarah, that's a lot of build there. But this is the process you would go through manually if you were going through all of this source code as well and trying to build it and get it ready for deployment onto your server. Now, what I want to do is actually make some changes to this and let this pipeline actually build in the background while I start to go and show you other bits and pieces. So what we want to do here is actually add on a bit to our pipeline that will create a release inside Octopus, and we'll show you that once we get to Octopus, and actually allow us to take the commit messages that I'm making and be able to see them inside Octopus as well. So what I'm going to do is copy this little bit of code, append it to my pipeline, and save it. Also going to make another change. So our Octo Pet Shop application has a date of 2020 on it, and we want to change that because, let's face it, that's the wrong date, even though it might feel like 2020 sometimes. So let's change it to 2022 and save that. I'm now going to make the commit message and push that into my Azure DevOps repo. So let's... Let's do a change. I'm not sure if I updated it. Yes, I did. Let's see. There we go. We're just using Git to push the changes up. So I'm going to say changing pipeline and date. I'm also going to do #16, because this should, when we see it inside Octopus later on, actually will reference my Azure DevOps board item that I have. And if I remember correctly, changing the date of my website is number 16 on my to-do list. So we'll hit commit and we'll push that up. So all my changes and all my code changes are getting pushed from my local machine up into Azure DevOps, and that should trigger the pipeline build off. Now, the pipeline build, I think, takes about 7 or 8 minutes. So what I'm going to do is let that all build off, and then I'm going to actually walk you through Octopus and we'll bring it back together. So we'll kick that off and then we'll flip over to Octopus to show you the various different parts of it. So I'm using Octopus in the cloud, and this is no different than what it would be if you were actually using a server. So if you were using Octopus on a server that you'd built, the interface would just be the same. So for anybody that's not familiar with Octopus, this is what the console would look like. It's a really simple GUI to navigate around. You have the top menu at the top, and whenever you go into something, you'll get a different change menu. And one of the features that I love is if you get stuck, or if you're unsure, or you've forgotten what something is, you can enable help. And what it'll do is send you some information around where you are, and it'll point you to the either documentation. You could raise a ticket with our support team if you're having an issue, so you've got that directness there. Or again, you've got some videos and training and different things. So if you are unsure about a menu system, or like me, sometimes you've forgotten what the options are when you're looking at a menu, then you can enable the help, and it can help you. And it's a great little feature that you can turn on or off depending on where you are inside Octopus. So if we have a look at some of the things that we've already set up, we'll look inside infrastructure, and we'll go into accounts. In here, this is where you would connect your data center or your environment. So because we're using Azure, we have already connected our Azure environment in the background. So I've given Octopus the rights to be able to create, delete, read, interact with all of the resources that I have inside Azure. And this is quite simple to do. You would click on Add Account and pick the cloud provider or the server that you wanted to add in here. You would either use like an API key or an IAM role in the AWS world, or you would create a service principal for Azure and walk through all of that process and make sure that you're following the best practices for your organization. I've already connected my Azure account, so we don't need to do that. What else I have created inside here is environments, where I've declared a small group for being able to look at the different types from the life cycle that I might have along the way. So I've got a test environment and I've got a production environment. Now, you may have more environments. You may have a dev environment inside there. You may have a QA or an additional section where you could add it in. This is where you would start to build what you have. So again, make it mirror what your life cycle is when you're actually deploying out to that. But we're keeping it very simple by just having the test, and we're going to have the production environment as well. Under library, what we have is variable sets. And here we've defined a lot of different things that can happen when we're actually doing our process or when we're building out our infrastructure. So inside Azure, I have declared all of the things that I need to be able to configure either my Azure infrastructure or actually interact with some of my deployment targets when I get to deploying my software. So I have things like the location for deploying my Azure services. So we've got West Europe, and that's the location that we'll be using. I've got different subnets as well. I've got different region codes, the resource group name. I've got my SQL Server password and username as well. Now, this is hidden. So these are sensitive variables inside the Octopus database. So me as a human being, I can no longer read that password. I can't get access to it. However, Octopus can still read it. It's encrypted in the background, but Octopus can still read it. You can't check it, you can't see it now that it's marked as a sensible variable, which is good from a security point of view. However, if you're trying to troubleshoot something, then you can't see it, so it can be quite tricky that way. But we have these passwords and usernames hidden for security reasons using a sensitive variable inside Octopus. Now, I've pre-populated all of this because I don't think anybody wanted to sit here and watch me type out a lot of this. What I want to show you, though, is how I've actually built the infrastructure inside Azure. So I've got projects here, and then I've got my Octo Pet Shop project. Now, in here, we've got the deployment process, and then under our operations, we have runbooks. So I've got a few runbooks built, and I've actually ran a few of them as well. So my very first runbook is building or creating my infrastructure using Bicep templates. So if we have a look at the process, what it's doing is running through the various different Bicep templates that I have. So it will create an Azure resource group for me, and it then will take my Bicep template and deploy out the infrastructure as the Bicep template requires it to be. So if we have a look inside this step and have a look at what it's actually doing. We can't store bicep templates natively inside Octopus Deploy. So what I've done is zip them all up into a zip file and stored them as a package inside Octopus. I then extract that package and then use a Azure PowerShell command to actually then interact with the template and deploy out the template for my infrastructure. I have done some talks on this separately, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but you can use your Azure Bicep, your ARM templates, Terraform templates to build out your infrastructure within a runbook. We then have a few steps after we've deployed our template. And what we're doing here is actually registering our new resources that we've created inside Azure within Octopus. And we then call that a deployment target. And this just tells Octopus that we have a server or a service. In this case, it's a service because it's an Azure web app that is available and we want to interact with it. We own that resource and we want to interact with it. And in this case, it is labeled or targeted or tagged as our product service web app API. And that's where we'll be deploying our product service API out to. We have our web front end one, and we have our shopping cart one. So hopefully you're all still with me here. I've already run this for the test environment, but what I want to do is fire it up for the production environment. So if I click on run, I get the option to pick which environment I want to run this on. So I'm going to click production. And what I could do is hit on advanced and then schedule this or change how this process or runbook actually ran. So I could schedule it for later on if I wanted to run it at 2 a.m. in the morning or whenever I wanted to fire up my production environment or even rip down it, depending on what my runbook did. But for now, I'm going to leave it as now because we want it to run now, and I'll click run. So this will kick off, and I think it takes about 10 minutes to run, so hopefully it'll be ready for us later on. As I said though, I've already run it for the test environment. So if I head back onto infrastructure and click into environments, we'll see that we have 4 healthy targets inside our test environment. So if we have a look here, we've already registered the test web apps for us. So we've got the test one for our web front end, the test for our shopping cart, the test for our product service. And then the 4th one is what we call a bastion box or a jump box. We don't tend to register the database servers directly inside Octopus for a security point of view. What we use is a jump box or a bastion box in between Octopus and our database server that will then try and deploy out what we're needing or the changes that we need for our database. So yeah, we have that in terms of our environment. So we've got those 4 ones for our test environment, and hopefully in about 10 minutes, we'll also have the same environment set up for production. So if we head on over to projects again and go back into our Octo Pet Shop, what we want to look at is the deployments. So we have the deployment process half built. We've been working on this and we've been looking at the various different stages. So what I want to do is walk you through this and actually make some changes around this as well. So the first step is deploying to our database. So we've taken what we call a community step inside Octopus, and we've said that we're wanting to deploy some changes to our database. So we're taking our database artifact and applying that to our jump box that will then apply it to our database inside Azure. The second step and the 3rd and 4th ones are very, very similar steps to each other. They will take the artifact around the product service API and deploy it out to the product service web app. Then the shopping cart one will do the same for the shopping cart part, and then the front end will do the same for the front end. Now, what you might notice here is we've got these little equal sign for some of these steps. And what that means is those steps will all run in parallel with each other. They'll run at the same time. So usually you can configure it whether it's running 1 by 1. So step 1 has to run, then step 2, then step 3. However, in order to be more efficient and try and speed up this process and the deployment, we're going to say that these 3 steps can actually run in parallel with each other. And we've tested this on our Octopus server, and the application and the different components inside Azure can all work with that and can all operate quite fine with that. Obviously, the more servers you may be interacting with, the more steps that you're trying to run, the more complexity you're trying to introduce with your process, you may have to have a look at this, and it's maybe not advisable to run everything in parallel, and you may have to think about things sequentially. So I want to change some of this process. I want to add in some steps. So let's click on Add a Step. And here we're showing our different step templates. I want to run a script that actually stops and starts my web apps every time within the test environment before we do a deployment to them. What we found while we've been testing is that the test environment, sometimes because we're applying it so quickly and so frequently, the Azure web apps can get a bit stuck. So stopping them and starting them again actually helps us with that. So what we want to do is click on Azure. And we want to run an Azure script. I'm going to call this Stop and Start Web. I'm going to pick my worker pool. So if we think about worker pools in terms of Azure DevOps, they're agents, or if in the GitHub world, they would be runners. These are just servers or containers in the back end that can help offload some of the workload that your pipeline is actually carrying out, and they have the right tools installed on it. So I have a Windows server in the background that has all of the Azure tooling, things like the Bicep modules, the PowerShell modules, the Azure CLI commands. That's all installed on that server, so it can carry out the steps that I'm asking it to carry out. So I'm going to click on my Azure account. If we click on our variable and put in Azure account, we're going to put in our PowerShell code, or small little bits of code that ultimately just restarts our Azure web app. This is a command inside the Azure PowerShell module that says for the resource inside this resource group and with this name, restart it. It's very simple. We've just changed the inputs using variables here so that we can repeat that off. So we'll click OK. Now I only want this to run in my test environment. I don't have this issue in production because we're not deploying as often or as many times during the day to production, so we don't have this issue. So what I do is under the conditions, I select run only for specific environments. So I'll click on test environment. And this step should only run in my test environment. It shouldn't trigger during my production environment runs. So I click on save. However, what you'll notice is this new step is at the bottom of that pile. So the deployment would happen and then the Azure web app would start and stop. I don't want that. I want to change the order. So if I click on this ellipsis and click on reorder steps, I can drag this up to the top and click OK. And then I save that again. So I've got another step that I want to run, this time for production. So if I click on add step and then click on manual intervention, what this step does is actually put kind of a stop gate on it. So we would have to manually click on a button to be able to deploy the process. And this is something that we do recommend sometimes in production environments so that you can sanity check if that deployment actually happens to your production environment, because let's face it, we've all made that mistake manually by actually pushing something to production when we weren't supposed to and we wanted to do it to test or a dev environments. And this step just does that sanity check for us. It just makes you stop and pause and make sure that you're okay. This could be a good step if you wanted to make sure that steps ran through, say, a change manager or a release manager or a project manager before running to production, and you didn't have access as a dev or an operations person to actually push those changes. It had to go to someone else to actually do this. So we'll leave the step name as manual intervention. We'll put in some instructions, and this could be the process that the person has to go through to make sure that this deployment is okay to run. I'm just going to say, are you sure? And that will prompt them to answer that question. What you would do here under responsible teams is probably have that group of people that are responsible for allowing their deployments happen to the production. You would probably have, like I said, the production release managers maybe group, and only certain people being allowed to do that. Because this is a test environment and I'm on my own this evening, I'm going to say everyone can change this and override the manual intervention. Obviously, you wouldn't do that in production. That's pointless, having everybody allowed to do a manual intervention. But again, for demon purposes, I'm going to leave it as everyone. This time, for our specific environments, I'm going to say production though, and I'm going to click save onto that. But again, it's at the bottom, so let's reorder these steps and drag this up to the top, because we definitely want that one to happen again before anything else happens. I'm going to add in one more step into this, and this time I'm going to search for it. So I'm going to click on Teams. I want to post a message into my Teams channel to let me know that this deployment has happened. Again, just for traceability, just for notification, so that everybody in the team knows it. We have a shared channel and we're posting it into that. Now, you could post into Slack if you wanted to. You could send out emails. You could add it to a ticket. We're working on integration with ServiceNow, so there's different things you could do here if you wanted to actually communicate this change has happened or something has happened. So we say run once on a worker. We'll pick my Windows worker pool again. So I've already got the webhook. So for Teams, you would just put in the webhook URL. For Slack, it's a bit more complicated. There's a few more things you have to do, but you can do that. We have a default message set up here that would say this project and release number has been deployed to a certain environment and various different things. You could obviously change that, and you can change what information is put there. I'm happy with the default. I'm going to go with that and click on Save. So we've now got our deployment process, and although it's still a fairly simple one, we have put in a bit of complexity about what steps can be run depending on the environment that's being run into them. So if we have a look at releases, we'll have that release that we built. So I've already been running this, so I've got release 0.0.1 and 0.0.2 there. However, 0.0.3 is the one that we actually kicked off at the very start of the demo. So see, when I changed the Azure DevOps pipeline and changed the date of the application, that was actually doing this release. And you can see it's finished and pushed everything through to me now inside Octopus. And if I expand this, we can see here that my commit message was changing pipeline and the date. And because I did that #16, it's actually linked it to the work item. So if I click on this, it should open my Azure DevOps environment. And yeah, it takes me straight through to that work item. So I can see I've got that traceability, I've got that link. So when I'm in Octopus, I know where that change has come from and what it relates to. If I had more messaging in here, that would be even better, and more instructions about what's happening. Again, just so that everybody knows where things are coming from and why that release was created and pushed through to Octopus. So if we go back to Octopus, what we want to do is actually run that deployment or run that release into their test environment. We see we've already tested out the previous releases. We never released them into production. And with this release, we have to release it to test before we can release it to production. We don't have the option to actually do that yet. So let's click on deploy and click yes. So again, what will happen here is it will have a look at our environment and hopefully it will deploy out. So it will deploy out our different packages and work through those stages for us. So we could have the task log and having a look at what's happening. We can change to verbose, so we can have a look at everything that's happening inside that, where it's getting its packages from, what stages it's all on, and keep an eye on that. So we'll let that run. And if we have a look at other parts inside Octopus, we can click on configuration. And the bit that I actually love here is the audit log, because it's so diverse in what it's actually doing. It's got that complexity around different things happening. So we can see all the things that I've been working on, all the changes that I've made recently. But I can go back and see what else has been changed as well. I can go back quite a bit in terms of traceability. Again, if you're doing an audit log, if you've got people coming on board, if you want to see why something has changed, what's happening. So there's lots of things that you can do inside the audit log. If you were to delete something inside Octopus, say you deleted that project or that run book, it wouldn't necessarily delete the audit log inside all of this for you as well. You would still have that audit log. So even if someone tried to delete what they were trying to hide, they wouldn't be able to, because the audit log has captured all of that as well. So there's lots of things inside the audit log that you should have a look at, and make sure you're capturing the length of detail that you need for your auditors and for your own safeguarding as well. So if we have a look back, let's see if that's still running. What we could do is we could manually create releases as well. So if we click on create release, we can create a release ourselves manually and click on save. And we could deploy that out to test if we wanted to. Since there's already a deployment running, I won't kick that off, but we have that option now of deploying number 4 as well. What we'll do is we'll have a look at number 3. So if we look at the task log, we should have a URL for our web front end. Now, fingers crossed this has worked. It may take a few minutes because it is an Azure web app and they always take a few minutes to actually kick off. So let's see if this will happen. So yeah, there I have my Octo Pet Shop deployed out. And you can see here, my data has changed. So it has actually taken that change that I had and ran that through and changed that for us. We could run that deployment out to production if we wanted. We'd get the same result. It would just say version 0.0.3 running in production and have that different change as well for us. So there's different ways of running that. Hopefully that's shown you my release as well. We could change what happens. So we could have our automatic release happening inside Octopus. We've triggered it so that when we create our pipeline inside Azure DevOps to actually create a release inside Octopus, we could actually change the trigger here and have that actually triggering to create a release, and even actually deploying out to our test environment as well. So there's different ways that you can configure how your releases happen, how your deployments happen, and where they all come from as well. So yeah, that's a kind of summary around Octopus Deploy and Azure. So if we have a look back at my slides, what we did this evening was build out our infrastructure in Azure using an Octopus runbook and Azure Bicep templates. We introduced that test environment, so we gave the Octo Pet Shop folks an extra environment for them. We introduced source control by using Azure DevOps and hopefully doing the right things around there. And then we built that CI/CD pipeline inside Azure DevOps and Octopus Deploy as well. And again, hopefully this is introducing a stable, repeatable and cost-effective solution from start to end for the Octo Pet Shop team, and ultimately for anybody wanting to do something similar. Thank you so much for listening to me this evening. If you want to grab any resources or even some of the templates that I use, so I have all my Bicep templates and even this slide deck if you wanted to grab a copy of that, and the link on screen right now. So please feel free to go and grab that, or my contact details are on screen if you want to reach out and ask me any questions or talk to me later on. I don't know if we've got any questions, Carol, but yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Sarah. Just waiting, I think there's a little delay, so we'll wait for any questions coming through, but thank you so much. That was really good.
Hopefully that made sense.
It did. I really, really liked it. It was a really good, it's quicker than any summary I've ever seen of Octopus, but still hitting all the important things, because there's so many parts of it, isn't there, to try and get through. So I think you're doing great. I personally really like the kind of explanation of run books. I think, like you said, they can be so powerful.
Yeah, they can be. As I said today, I was doing a demo with AWS and building out infrastructure there as well. So there's different things you can do with them, and it's dead powerful. So yeah, I really do like the run books.
Awesome. I looked at your documentation. I really liked, so like there's the scheduled things that you mentioned, and but it never occurred to me before as well. I can see in the documentation it says about kind of DR things, so like anything you might want to do for disaster recovery, like failing over to a DR site, or like restoring databases, or like setting up your infrastructure. It's really powerful.
Yeah, I think some of our customer solutions team have done some great things with runbooks about automating, like you said, the database restores, because let's face it, we all hate when we have to recover a database, because it's never fun, it's never easy, and it's never straightforward, right? So
and it's always good when those things are testable and repeatable as well. So as soon as they're in runbooks and you know that it works, then you know it's going to be repeatable.
Yeah,
on those
absolutely.
occasions. And a question for me, I guess, if someone was getting started, like, you know, they're going to set up a fresh CI/CD and they want to use Octopus Deploy, where would you recommend they go and get started?
We have some great getting started tutorials, actually, Carol. You can go on our website and actually say what you're using. So you input what you're using. So if you're using like .NET, you put that in your source code. You then say where your source control is. That could be Azure DevOps. And then you say like where your infrastructure is. And what it'll actually build out for you is a bespoke tutorial based on your answers, and then walk you through all of the steps. And I believe it will give you some sample code as well. So if you actually don't have a .NET application, there's some sample codes, but it will take you through everything. So it'll take you through starting signing up for Azure DevOps, if that's the one you've chosen, then building that pipeline and starting that up, and just every step you can imagine, to be honest, that you would have to go through. So we have some great documentation that the team have worked on around that as well. So yeah, that's probably the best place to go to. Head over to our documentation.
That's really cool. Like choose your own adventure for documentation.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's great. Well, I don't see any questions yet. I'll just give it another wee minute for folks. But again, thank you very much. That was really, really great. It was a really good explanation, even from, you know, it's good to see setup of DevOps right through to deployment.
Yeah, I know it can be quite complex when you start to set up, like Azure DevOps itself is such a powerful tool, getting that started up. But yeah, it's good fun doing that demo. And if anybody wanted to go through that themselves, like I said, the link on screen will take you to all the code that you need to be able to do that and build it yourself if you wanted to give it a go.
Awesome. And I liked that, you know, we had to wait. It was realistic. We had to wait for the build to build, right? So there wasn't, here's one I made earlier. We had to wait for it to build. And I really liked that. So thank you.
No worries.
Great. Well, if there's no questions then, I guess thank you again. One thing I'll mention is you run the local Glasgow, well, local to some of us, I guess, Azure meetup. So if folks are interested in the Azure or Azure, I say it very Glaswegian, don't I?
Yeah.
So when are those meetups?
So we're actually meeting on the 27th of April in person. We're going to do a small social gathering where we'll have drinks and some snacks, and yeah, we'll just get some people together and figure out where we go forward with the whole user group and whether we go back in person or not. So if you're in the Glasgow area, please do sign up for it. Please do let us know that you're going to turn up so as I can engage some numbers. But we'd love to see people in person, because I've got stickers. I even bought stickers to give out. So it's such an unusual thing to do. But yeah, 27th of April, we'll be in Glasgow if you want to come along and say hello to us.
That's great. Real life meetups. I'm really looking forward to them. Great. Well, again, thank you, and thanks to folks for joining us. And we will announce details of, we've got a speaker lined up, but we just need to announce to figure out the date before we announce it. But we'll put that on socials and on Meetup and all the usual places. But until then, thanks again, and we'll see you soon. Have a good night.